Welcome to the third How to Make a Scene conversation here at Crow Prosperity on a beautiful day here in Bridgeport, Chicago. How to Make a Scene is a conversation series about artist-run cultural ecosystems of the 1980s and 1990s in Chicago. The series launched on June 20th on Lumpen Radio and continues through October with more radio broadcasts, with the live conversation starting at Crow Prosperity on July 13th. The series is a collaborative effort between the Public Media Institute and MDW with support from the Terra Foundation for American Art as part of the citywide initiative Art Design Chicago. The project aims to connect veteran artist organizers with those working today through a combination of intimate events here at Crow Prosperity, broadcasts on Lumpen Radio, and live streams on LumpenTV. The series offers audiences trailheads for further exploration of Chicago's storied history of alternative gallery spaces, independent publication, and socially engaged collectives. Today, moderator Jen Delos Reyes will be speaking with panelist Joanne Aono, director of alternative art project Cultivator, Chicago Arts Exhibition and Farm Art Projects, along with Brian Holmes and Claire Pentecost from Watershed Art and Ecology, Chicago. The conversation between four artists organizers focused on ecologies is taking place fittingly in the ecologies section of the exhibition in concert with, showcasing the work of Jen and her collaborators for the past 20 plus years. How to Make a Scene is part of Art Design Chicago citywide collaboration initiated by Terra Foundation for American Art that highlights the city's artistic heritage and creative communities. All of the panels will be archived on Mixcloud, Vimeo, and the 2024 MDW Atlas, which will be printed as a book in 2026. More information about this program can be found on our website, www.publicmediainstitute.com. So I'll introduce our moderator. Jen Delos Reyes, born in Winnipeg, Canada, is an artist, educator, writer, and radical community arts organizer. With roots in Riot Girl and DIY music scene, her practice incorporates pedagogical, ecological, and organizational methodologies. She founded and directed Open Engagement, an international conference on socially engaged art that was active from 2007 to 2019. She worked within Portland State University from 2008 to 2014 to create the Art and Social Practice MFA program with a curriculum focused on place, engagement, and dialogue. She is the author of several publications, most recently Defiantly Optimistic, Turning Up in a World on Fire. Reyes was the Associate Director of the School of Art and Art History of the University of Illinois Chicago, where she taught in the departments of Art and Museum and Exhibition Studies. She is currently Associate Professor and Associate Dean for Diversity and Equity at the Cornell University College of Architecture, Art, and Planning. She splits her time between Chicago, where she founded Garbage Hill Farm, and Ithaca, New York. She describes herself as, quote, defiantly optimistic, a friend to all birds, and proponent that our institutions can become tender and vulnerable. So I'll hand it over to Jen.
Yeah. He does.
Well, I am delighted to be here this afternoon and in this context with these amazing people. It feels very fitting to be in the ecologies section or between the ecologies and also the scene building section of this exhibition with these folks whose work I feel similarly straddles arts ecosystems and broader ecologies. We have with us today Claire Pentecost. In her practice, artist and writer Pentecost uses poetic and inductive drawing, photography, and sculptural installation to explore the living matters of the unified, multidimensional being that animates the critical zone of our planet. Her work is driven by research and inspired by questions of form. We have Brian Holmes with us. Holmes is an essayist and map maker, exploring territories of social ecological change. He has a PhD in Romance languages and literature from UC Berkeley and lived an earlier life in France as a translator, cultural critic, and activist, collaborating with artists, museums, and social movements all over Europe. Together, they form Deep Time Chicago, a collective exploring cultural change in response to ecological crisis and the Anthropocene Commons, an international research network. The mission of Watershed Art and Ecology is to create openings for discussions of the current human predicaments, societal, environmental, economic, and racial. Defining both art and ecology beyond standard expectations, it presents programs and exhibits that address our relations with each other and with the natural environment. Through biocultural experiences of place, watersheds, it seeks emergent ecological knowledge. And Joanne Aono, Director of Cultivator, Chicago Art Exhibitions and Farm Art Projects. Joanne is a visual artist, curator, and holistic farmer. Her research-based drawings, paintings, and installations address identity, immigration, and the environment. Her solo exhibitions include Boundary, Chicago, Mosnart, Chicago, Lee Dulger Gallery, South Holland, and Geneva Center for the Arts. She has been included in two-person and group exhibitions at Firecat Projects, Chicago, the Illinois State Museum, Chicago, Springfield, and Lockport, Terrain Biennial, Rockford Art Museum, and many others. All right, so I want to start by framing the panel discussion with two examples from Culture in Action, a public art program of Sculpture Chicago that was organized by Mary Jane Jacob in 1992. Flood, a volunteer network for active participation in healthcare that was active from 92 to 95, and the Chicago Urban Ecology Action Group, active from 92 to 93. So Flood, a volunteer network for active participation in healthcare, was organized by a Chicago-based collective, HaHa. Members included Richard House, Wendy Jacob, Lori Palmer, and John Plouffe. And as described in the Culture in Action program guide, artists and volunteers are cultivating a hydroponic garden to produce vegetables and therapeutic herbs for use by HIV/AIDS service organizations. The garden serves as a center for community dialogue as well as a metaphor for caregiving. And the second is Chicago Urban Ecology Action Group. Mark Dion in collaboration with 14 high school students. As described in the program guide, a year-long collaboration between the artist and 14 high school students with focus on tropical ecosystems and urban environments has resulted in an experimental ecological field station that bridges the realms of art and nature. So these projects provide some context and foundation for our conversation today in several ways. One, grounding us in the spirit and energy of some of the very work and legacies of the 80s and 90s that this series points to, in particular the HaHa example. Two, though it was a temporary and initiated project by an artist not in Chicago, I do feel that the Chicago Urban Ecology Action Group example is a great one in terms of an artist's exploration of ecological themes. And lastly, both examples touch on systems of care, collaboration, and cooperation, which will really be at the core of this conversation today. So I have 10 questions prepared for our panelists. We're going to spend the rest of our hour tackling these. We're not going to do a formal Q&A, but we'll be around for the last 30 minutes of this scheduled event for folks who would like to keep the conversation going. So let's jump right in. Okay, this first question is for everyone. What examples from the Chicago scene from the 80s and 90s would you say had an impact on the work that you do? Let's start here and move on down.
I would say my involvement with what was known as the Peace Museum I got involved in the later 80s and 90s. It was an organization founded by two people. One was a muralist, Mark Rogovin, and the other was Marjorie Benton, who was a former UNICEF ambassador. And just the whole idea of getting volunteers and group movement to put on exhibitions, do events that were based on a broad theme of anti-war and the history of war and violence. That I spent many years as a volunteer working with that organization and putting up exhibitions. I ended up doing quite a few of the exhibitions and like staging a performance art event and things like that. And that led me and still reminds me to this day of how to organize things and how getting others involved in even a broad topic to address current day issues continues.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say I'm really happy to be here in this fantastic exhibition about kind of, recapping the work of really prodigious work by Delos Reyes. I wasn't here really in the 90s, but I was here for mess hall, and I was one of the key holders. Mark is here, who was also a key holder and one of the originary people of mess hall. The situation was that someone, Mark, do you remember his name? Al Goldberg. Offered the space to temporary services to make a cultural and really an art gallery in Rogers Park, because he owned a lot of real estate, and the way I understood it was that he knew that having cultural activity in the area raised property values. That's a kind of crass way of understanding his motivation, but it was also very generous. So he offered this space for $1 a year, and Temporary Services said, we don't want to have an art gallery, but we will make an experimental cultural space. And the organization was non-hierarchical, and oh darn, I meant to bring, we did have a 10-point kind of identificatory set of principles that took a while to arrive at, because we didn't assume that all the key holders agreed on everything. And in fact, we would get proposals to do events and shows, and we, it was kind of like if some key holders wanted to support it, then we would have it. And if nobody wanted to support it, didn't happen. But we also would work with people who wanted to do something and help them, organize something that would be meaningful and bring in, and have requisite publicity. And everything there was free, because we wanted to kind of pass on this idea of surplus in a very affluent society, that since we got the space for free, we would make everything for free, and we almost always had food, and it lasted for 10 years until Al wanted the space for other purposes. So I was involved with that, and that was more in the 2000s. As far as, the rest, in terms of the 80s and 90s, it's things I've heard about that maybe we can talk about later.
Yeah, I can't really add too much here, because I only moved to Chicago in 2009, and it took me a while to land, as a matter of fact. But I think when you live in a place and you participate, you are sort of unconsciously affected by a history that you don't know, And of the histories that affect me, the only one that I really know is a little bit the story of co-prosperity, where I have the co-prosperity sphere is surely one of the first places I came to in Chicago, and I think we all know that story here. I'm quite curious about activism in Chicago in the later 80s and early 90s. I know there was the whole Axe Street Arena thing that Michael Piazza was involved in. I think that would be really interesting if this series can bring out some of those things, the Stockyard Institute, some of this kind of activism that fed into and became, the stuff that I was involved with in Europe and here also, the counter-globalization movement. Because I think that it is kind of ridiculous not to know your own immediate history, the immediate history of your community, but that's the way it is, And art, what art does is it's really good at historicizing, but it does so by making a break between those who are worthy of being historicized and those who are not, And what we can do in alternative culture is make it much more inclusive and try and understand how the because our thing is to relate to the texture of everyday life. And so, you know, I can read a few things, and I have read a few things about these, about some of the historical things that interest me, but that doesn't really, what you really need is this kind of conversation, I think. So let's move ahead with it.
Can I add to that? I think that that's a good point, in that that there, in addition to my involvement with the Peace Museum, that branched out to other things, because we were also involved with music and musicians, and then that we got involved with Amnesty International, the hot publication that we were reading at that time was In These Times, and so there was this crossover of all different elements that then, you know, so it's not just art, it's music, it's writing, it's,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, all involved. Yeah.
This next question is going to take an ecological turn. You know, we're talking about learning from histories, but I'd like to know what you each believe we can learn from the natural world, whether it be other species, other systems, patterns. As art organizers, what lessons are there to be had in some of those things?
As an art organizer.
An artist arts organizer, yeah, people who are supporting these systems.
I would say, okay, so I live on a farm, so my observance of the natural world is the flora and fauna, and I would, to kind of, because we're on this backdrop of birds, I witness like the yearly rotation of birds to the farm. We have a family of swallows that regularly nest in our barn, and they will build these beautiful mud nests each year. And each year the terrible sparrows will try and take them out and try and take over their nests and that. But the swallows will consistently come back, and we know that the babies that they then have then come back to the barn as well, and we end up having more and more of these beautiful mud nests, and there are seasons where the birds don't live because other animals will get to them or whatever. But I think that, like, as an arts organizer, I kind of look at that as you got to go back to where you came from to learn from what you've done, but you've also have to face up with things that change your direction. You have to keep thinking of new ways. You have to, and you also have to work with others, because like the swallows, there'll be like 6 swallows that are guarding the one nest. It's not just a parents, a pair of parents. So that's my sort of analogy with nature.
Well, I live in probably the most urban neighborhood of Chicago, which is Pilsen. So it's not so much in my daily life, but I'm a student of nature. And by being a student of nature, I learn about paying attention. And I think, and about, I guess I feel like learning about our world is learning to love our world. And we just don't love it enough. Which is the source of one of our predicaments, an ongoing predicament. I also learn about change and transformation because of all the transformations that happen in nature, from the seed to the tree to the plant. I've done a lot of planting and working with soil in my own work. So I've studied the world underground, and one of the things I observe in nature is mutual aid. The mycelium and the plant roots are in a constant condition of exchange. The plant offers starches and sugars to the fungus, and the fungus brings minerals, water, and oxygen to the plant. That's just one example. And if you've read Suzanne Simard, Finding the Mother Tree, she's a forester, a Canadian forester, who demonstrated that trees will actually help each other, even trees of different species. They will help each other get through difficult times, and you know, the work of Lynn Margulis, an environmental microbiologist, showed us that evolution is driven by symbiosis at least as much, if not more, than competition. And so I think there's so much to learn from the natural world. Without the effort is to not anthropomorphize it too much, to let nature be different, while we are maybe in a state of emulation, to bring out the better parts of our natures.
That's great. Yeah, maybe something I mean, there's so much could be said in answer to this question, but maybe the shortest answer is borderlessness. There's something incredible about the way that nature constantly overflows, encroaches, invades through the cracks, co-inhabits, you know. And this is really meaningful to our project at Watershed Art and Ecology, because as Claire pointed out, we're in the middle of the city. And in fact, our building totally covers the lot, right? So there isn't a blade of grass coming out of there. And like many people living in the city, we could be led to believe that we in the city are completely different from a thing called nature that's out there, which we can visit by going to Joanne's farm maybe, or even a little further. But I think what we're quite interested in is the way that the borderlessness of nature, almost because of this incredible metropolitan prejudice of our Western societies, this borderlessness almost requires art to, for one to become aware of it, you know? And so to become aware of the natural, of the way in which the city is not separated from nature, I think is a pathway to not only inquiring into, but sort of like feeling out the nature of oneself, you know, as an animal, as a member of a population, as the carrier of a tremendous, you know, evolution that influences or that even creates the way that we see, the way that we think, the way that we feel. And so that interests me a lot, and there's a fancy term for that, of course, which is called the Anthropocene.
Thank you. This next question is for Joanne. There's a Javanese proverb that I really resonate with that goes, when asked what makes a good dancer, the master replied, first, to be a good dancer, one must know the music as well as the dance. And what else? Well, to be a better dancer, one must understand the stories and be able to interpret the characters being portrayed. Is there more? The best dancer is the one who has all those things I've told you about and is also a farmer. And so I would love to hear from you what farming has taught you and brought to all the other work that you do.
Okay. Farming has taught me to observe better, to slow down, to look and see that there's so much that one shouldn't want to control. As much as you plan out farming, as you know, you can't, nothing is ever in your control. Weather, bugs, animals, disease, everything can totally change what you think is going to happen. And what I've learned is not to fight that you need to embrace it. And just like any other element of one's life, there's always going to be curveballs, and but with farming, it's exponential. It's and it's just like the planning has to have so many different alternatives, and comparing that with the art world, it's very similar. And I think that being a farmer, so a little bit of background, I was born in Chicago, so like city life is what I'm used to. And we've been on the farm for 11 years now. So it's been something that I'm happily embracing all of the changes and new knowledge that's coming my way. But I feel like the 11 years of living on the farm have been like this, like my life has sped up in those 11 years because there's been so much to learn. Like it's like drastic learning, not just how to do farming and things, but also learning about myself. So, so I don't know if I answered the question.
Definitely did. Okay. Thank you. All right. This next one is for, well, actually, let's see. Yeah, this one's going to be for Brian and Claire. In the ongoing environmental crisis that we find ourselves in, I'm curious what you feel that art uniquely brings to these issues, or can bring.
You want me to go or you want to go?
Go ahead.
Well, I think our problems are cultural. I don't think they're technological. I think that we can kind of galvanize the technology that we need to live differently on the planet, but we don't have the consciousness, and we don't have a realistic vision of what it would really mean to live differently, to inhabit the earth in a way that's less destructive. I mean, yeah, so maybe this is just a rationalization for me for why I think making art and presenting cultural events and events for conversation is actually making an impact. But I started out after college as a community organizer, so I had a lot of, and I've had various experiences with activism, and I truly don't know what is the best thing to do in terms of how to initiate and sustain the kind of changes we need, but I think there's an important role for culture, and that's just what I do.
Yeah, I think there is something to art as having a special power, but it's really particular. I mean, for me, art is the whole practice and not the work, right? And indeed, the way that we do art now is like that. We set up situations, we engage people, we engage ourselves, we let ourselves be touched by things. We then either previously or often because we were touched by something, we study it, we delve into, literature, we engage in all sorts of concepts. And so that sounds a lot like everyday life, where's the specialness of the art? There's something about the quest to sharpen your perception That interests us a lot because we engage in sort of walking tours constantly in order both to open ourselves up as individuals and then to share that and to create a communities of perception and, of course, of feeling and therefore of expression. And I think that what's great about, art since conceptualism is that you no longer have to specialize that out with a border that would exclude concepts, that would exclude that other way of intensifying your perception, which is to change the definitions that shape the way that you look at things, approach things, touch things, and so on. And that, I think art is this experimental field, and that's where its specialty, its specialism lies. Not in any particular thing that it does, but the way that it intensifies the whole, it intensifies everyday life, but when that's being lived in an intentional way, okay? And so it brings in this thing of an intentionality that then intensifies and gives a capacity to express things that aren't being expressed. And since I came to Chicago, what has obsessed me is exactly the edge of the city, because I felt like, wow, here is something that is not expressed in this town. You have the downtown, the loop, which only knows itself, the neighborhoods, which exist in this kind of like this sort of like passive aggressive or whatever, this situation of like turning your back on the thing that dominates you. But then you get to the edge of the city, it's industrial ruins and the beginning of the agricultural world, and there's nothing about that. There's no experience of that in this great endless relation between the loop and the neighborhood. So I was always drawn to that. And I think that intensifying one's awareness and capacity to express that is a way to get to this borderlessness of nature I was talking about before.
This next question is for everyone again, and it's a return to farming. So monocultures, over-farming, soil depletion, GMOs, there are parallels to all of these in the art ecosystem. Cultivating artists for the market, reproduction of the neutral white space, homogenizing writing about art. I feel like Chicago has done an amazing job of countering many of those forms, and I'm curious what you all feel has contributed to making Chicago's cultural ecosystem as diverse as it is, right? A range of spaces, scales of projects, approaches to sustainability, and then what can we do to conserve this spirit?
I think a lot of it has to do kind of with what Brian was just saying. I think the neighborhoods activated by the ethnicities that are there, the neighborhoods of the elderly and the youth. I think that's the strength in that then permeates into the art world. I love that like, I'll come in for a Saturday and go to different neighborhoods to check out the art that's happening, and it's very different in each neighborhood, each venue, and I think that difference is what keeps things strong. It at least that's what's keeping me interested in going to see more art. I think that's a strength, and it relates to exactly what you were saying. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot has been said about this, so I should have an answer, but I don't. I don't really. One is that I moved here from New York City, and the market is such a powerful force in New York, and I don't feel that as a force here. I mean, there really isn't much of a market here, and that leaves space for a culture that is not as competitive. I also think it's something that it's like a feedback loop. The more because of this history, And because, it's sort of like the more people, artists and other interested people make these spaces that are not regulated, and that's something we could stay vigilant about, that they're not regulated. But I think the more that people are doing these kind of innovative ventures for bringing people together around the practice of art, other people see it and think, I can do that. I can do that too. The fact that we have a lot of art masters and undergrad programs in the city, and a lot of graduates see what's happening here. They have opportunities that they wouldn't have in another city, and they stick around, a lot of them, and at least long enough to help promote this kind of culture. But it's, you're asking kind of, how do you create a culture and maintain it? And there's so many factors. I think it's wise to actually keep this in mind, this question that you've asked, like, how is it that we have such a scene, and how can we, the other thing is lower rents than in a lot of other major cities. So, so a lot of these battles that don't look like they're related to art are, of course, relevant to the possibilities, the sense of possibility here.
Yeah, that's totally right. I mean, when I first came here, the really great thing at Co-Prosperity Sphere and Meso was to rediscover the American counterculture that I knew in the 70s, before I became a PhD student and then left for Europe, right? And so I discovered here, Chicago, foreign city for me, I rediscovered something that was entirely new because, what linked it to the 70s is the kind of resistance, a certain modesty, a refusal to occupy someone else's space, to claim someone else's project or results and so on, an appreciation for all that goes in to making local culture. I think that's the fundamental thing, and that's a form of resistance, So I like that. That's really the only thing that I want to participate in the cultural world, because frankly, I feel rather burned by society right now, and it seems very poorly organized to me. So I think really I appreciate the grassroots organization of things much, much more. When Claire and I set about making a scene, what we wanted to do was the opposite of the formula that capitalism has for culture, which is to take it wherever it is found, clean it of its local sort of what can't travel, what's untranslatable, and so on, and project it to a metropolitan stage in a major city, right? So we decided we would do the continental drift through the Midwest Radical Cultural Corridor and look for the Chicago-esque scenes that are happening around the Midwest and try and get ourselves out of the kind of lemming-like drive to go to these big centers of culture and of power, And so we wandered around a lot in the Midwest, and particularly spent a lot of effort going to Detroit and Minneapolis, and then later on St. Louis. And when we finally, much further down the line, after we had formed Deep Time Chicago, we then had this Anthropocene River project, which engaged people across the Midwest and all the way to New Orleans, which wasn't really on my in my sense of regionality until realizing that it's the river that defines our region, And so then, now I feel like, in a way, over those years, this form of resistance I was talking about before has grown more self-aware in the United States. I think there's a reason why now we really can feel like we have a what Ryan Griffiths once called regional relationships, and Sarah
does.
Ross in a project they have been doing for a long time, that these regional relationships are really possible, and that they're possible in a way that's increasingly intentional, self-reflective, constructed, and a matter of fact, it's really great. Because you don't just make a scene, you're part of one, and whatever you have contributed, it comes back to you. So today, as Co-Prosperity engages in all these drifts across the Midwest and sets up the chance for people to talk to each other in this expanded region, I think we're starting to have another regionality. When they talk about the Midwest and the Rust Belt in the newspapers, we know that's not us. But they don't know, because our expressive capacities are not great enough. We're working on that. We're making a scene. We're growing it. And I really appreciate how collective that is, because there are things I can't do anymore, like the Continental Drift through the Midwest Radical Cultural Corridor. It's fantastic to see people, other people doing something that's never the same thing.
And if I could just break the format for a second, and because I had another thought. Artists need validation, and I think one of the things we're doing is setting up alternative circuits of validation, so that artists aren't just hoping for their break with the MCA, like that's the only way you can be validated as an artist, but rather setting up another reward besides careerism, which is community, and the feeling that you're building something that didn't come from above, that's not run by people more powerful with more money than you, etc. And so this alternative circuit of validation, I think, is a really important part of what Chicago is good at.
Yeah, and Claire, by the way, when we went out for the drifts through the Midwest Radical Cultural Corridor, this was a major idea that we had. What do we call it? Something like mutual self-recognition? Or something?
Mutual self-recognition.
Yeah.
So
Go
beautiful.
figure what that
heard
might
it
mean.
Well, Claire, I'm glad you brought in Susan Simard earlier, because it really connects to this next question. So I feel like a healthy arts ecosystem is in many ways like a forest, right? There is the overstory, which we could see as the established institutions, orgs, subcanopy, mid-size galleries, perhaps, art centers. Understory could be seen as the emergent institutions and organizations. The rhizosphere, which you described earlier, could be that network of artist-run spaces. And then the forest floor I see as like all the past projects that are sort of decaying and providing the nutrients, right? But then in that, metaphor, then there's also the mother tree. And so I'm interested in hearing from you all about who would you identify as a mother tree in our ecosystem, right? That sort of tree managing the resources to the community, kind of sending things out and taking care of others.
This is a hard question, because it's, in some ways, it's kind of identifying not the enemy, but I don't know. So sometimes I feel like it's who controls the grants. Sometimes I feel it's the Art Institute. It's almost like if you don't teach there, or if you didn't get a degree from there, then you're not going anywhere. So it's hard to say. I think that there's this tangled web of trees out there that are getting in our way. But,
I think we have many mothers, and I'm thinking of it not so much of like the all-powerful, like, the Art Institute gets more than its fair share of attention, because it just thinks it's so great. But Oh, gosh. Co-prosperity is one, for sure. And, this is where you have to name names. And it's either menopause or legal THC, but I have a lot of holes in my brain now. And I think that what else was I thinking of? It'll come to me at the wrong moment. But I would like to really embarrass someone right now, which is Mark Fisher, because whose name I was struggling to finish when I was talking about mess hall. But we know Mark Fisher because all his projects, they're like with the library or the courts or the Jangbu kiosk, and I think it's a model of putting your creative energy where you live. And I think I realized many years ago, living in Chicago, that you can have more impact if you put your energy where you live, than trying to be part of a kind of global meta world where, I've had a little bit of experience in that art world, and it's hard to feel like you're really getting traction. But I think it was Donna Haraway said something like, we have to have many queer mothers, and it's the more the merrier.
Yeah, I kind of resist the idea of the mother tree, I'm afraid. It doesn't really do anything for me, because I can't find it, I can't find out where it is, for me it would be, the Chicago River, It flows in the wrong direction, but it flows, or it would be the street, what I think is really incredible in Chicago, the kind of, and I think, all of us are engaged with that, the sort of energy of the people you don't know, the resistance of those people who are also us, and the way that you feel yourself. This is it. When you feel yourself disappearing, then you can become part of this mother tree, which otherwise doesn't exist. Otherwise, I think that the total surveillance society just parcels everything out into value streams that have nothing of the beauty of a tree. I would rather feel myself to be part of that massive thing than identify it and so on.
Well, related to that rhizomatic layer, I would love to hear from each of you maybe one unsung hero or maybe under the radar kind of space or organization right now that feels important.
Right now.
Well, here, co-prosperity sphere, that like the fact that there are places like this that have such a broad range of missions is really valuable, and your individual names are not necessarily known. There's a lot of organizations like this where the organization is known, but the people that do all the work are only known by those who end up working with them. And so there's a lot of places like that. In particular, I think of the Visualists, which is run by Michael Thomas and Meg Dogood, where if we didn't have that, I wouldn't know where to go see art. You can find the listings on Instagram, but that means that you're then having to take a pen and write down all the information because you can't even cut and paste from Instagram. But it's things like that are just making it, helping to spread the community, the ability to have a community of artists in Chicago. And those are all done by, all these places are all done by individuals who end up going nameless. So,
I'd like to shout out to Mark Fisher. No, just kidding. I know, I'm done embarrassing you. Anyway, there's so many, and right now I'm aware of the Hyde Park Art Center that actually is supervising a grant to artist-run spaces, which is kind of unheard of. I mean, and you don't have to be a 501c3. You know, we got one and we'd hardly existed. We were just an idea in a building. But I really like what Joanne said about this kind of spirit of anonymity, that it's like, you know, what gets so sickening in New York is careerism, you know, as a kind of prime motivator. And here, like I was talking about, because there's a growing sense of other kinds of rewards that, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But I think that there's so many, you know, I just keep hearing of new artist-run projects, and I think I've heard of them all, but it's like towns in New Jersey or something where you think you know them all, but then somebody comes up with another one, and it's more than I can attend to, but I think it's like this favorite quote I have by Charles Darwin in his book on worms, his last book, which was on earthworms. And he says, in the introduction, he says, for those of you who are not interested in small agencies and their accumulated effects, you will not be interested in this book. And so that idea of the small agencies and their accumulated effects is something I feel like is real, and something that we can actually be part of, rather than, yeah, that's enough.
Yeah, exactly. I think I love that phrase of the small agencies. You know, we were here recently at Co-Prosperity for an event that was like so many of the events that have changed my life in Chicago. I think that what sustains, one of the things that sustains the artist communities here is the constant attention to what's not art, but is definitely aesthetic. You know what I mean? It definitely touches you. And so we were here at a PNAP event, a Prison Neighborhood Arts Project event, and a woman came to give a portrait of her son who had been killed to the mother of the person who killed him, if I understood right. I mean, this is an unsung heroine, or maybe just not sung by us, and here was a chance that we got to understand how you can live through things that you really can't live through, that you really can't survive as the same person that you were before that happened, you know? And I think that kind of empathy, to me, is what's sustaining the resistance and the creativity, the difference, the sort of capillary quality of this scene that we're talking about, of all these small agencies that Claire just evoked. It's really something, you know, and I definitely would, although I haven't found a way to collaborate. I've been so affected by the voices of these prisoners. You know, that event was largely organized by Aaron Hughes, and the weekend before there had been this Zoom broadcast from the prison, you know? And so then you're getting to the ultimate in what used to be not just unsung but rejected, you know, and that's profound, and that really, you know, that changes you, and even in a modest way, I would say that has really changed me, you know. So I of this I sing.
Thank you. I'm curious what ways you all have found to keep your work sustainable here in Chicago over the years.
Ways to keep it sustainable. For me, it's interaction. Like I feel like all artists, we have this need to communicate. It's part of the reason we do art. And I think the more I interact with others, it keeps it more sustainable. I don't know. It's a difficult question because I'm always questioning whether my art is sustainable. So it's like,
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's desire, the desire to connect. And I used to tell my students, let's be generous in our crits, because generosity is generative. And I think there's a lot of generosity in this town. And I know I've benefited from it a lot, and I want to give back. And so it's like setting up those cycles of you know, I think it's sustaining to find ways to contribute, and that's what we're trying to do with our space. Otherwise, it's just questions like, you know, how do you pay the rent? And we're all facing that, and I don't have an answer. But in terms of the spirit of the thing, I think generosity is and desire to connect is a real driver.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess it would be a simple way to say it is dinners and zines. You know, Claire and I invite a lot of people over for dinner, you know, or for party or drinks or an after. Now that we have this gallery space, you know, an after the end of the show, closing, opening, whatever. But before, when we just had a normal house, we did the same thing, and we had a, you know, lower floor, and people were staying there all the time. And this is because I mean, if you get to, I think a lot of people's predicament is that we all cultivate ourselves very intensely, and this makes you more and more different, you know. And so, how do you reach out? How do you sustain this practice? And in my case, I cultivated, you know, my head a lot. I'm a super intellectual person. In an anti-intellectual country, which I fled for 20 years, you know, and then when I came back, I had serious survival problems, you know. One of the ways I found to survive is by making zines, because in a weird way, it allows me to go on writing and being read in a way that is nourishing, because when somebody reads your zine, there's inevitably some kind of contact there. So I think that for a lot of people, this kind of production where you're able to distribute something in addition to showing it, or, you know, where you're able to let something go and slip out into the world, it's pretty sustaining.
Good idea.
Well, we're about to come to a close. I have one last question for you all, and that is, what is the seed you hope you are planting for the next generation of Chicago artists and arts organizers?
Mine is related to what Claire was saying. I feel like generosity is a really important element of anybody who's involved in an arts organization or a venue or whatever, and especially the type that we all do, where there's absolutely, like, the goal is not to make a living. The goal is not to even bring in money. like Claire had mentioned, the Hyde Park Art Center grant, which Cultivator also got one, and which was, I'm sure, like you guys, total shock. You know, it's like you get this amount of money that you can do whatever you want with, and there's no restrictions. And for me, what I ended up doing is then it allowed me to give stipends to the artists that come to Cultivator. And that's one thing that I was not able to do before. But I feel like I would love that all the work that we're doing today has a snowball effect of inspiring others to do similar and spread this generosity. I don't know, it might be too complimentary to me to take that as what I'm doing, because I feel like what was the term you used? There is, like, being able to do Cultivator does somewhat define what I do as an artist. And I try to separate it out that my goal with Cultivator from the start was that I just wanted to help other artists. As an artist myself, I knew that it was really difficult to find places to exhibit, and so that was really the goal of Cultivator. When we were looking for a farm, I had like 3 things on my list of what I wanted to find, and one of the things was that it had to be a place that I could show other artists at. And so, you know, it wasn't a nice kitchen. It was, you know, I wanted a place to show artists at. And so I think for all of us, you know, what we do with our art is part of our lives. It's you know, an element of our lives. And I feel like the seed I would like to show other people that your life can be, your life, your art world can be one and the same. And, you know, just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, great, Joanne. Yeah, I think I've said a lot of what I'd like to contribute. I think I just want people to have the frame of mind that they don't have to be waiting for some other force to give them the chance to connect with an audience, or connect with anyone, and that I just want to be, you know, another one of the many spaces in Chicago that I think it actually creates a kind of optimism about agency, and optimism is a strategy. It's not necessarily a rational thing. It's a strategy for making things happen, and in empowering other people, if that makes sense.
You know, I think the artists of the 80s and 90s reinvented political radicality, certainly for myself and probably for all of us, and this is kind of a lot what these talks are looking to delve into. That reinvention, you know, that allowed people to go out into the street, and then ultimately later on to go into nature and to do art away from the institutions. But we always had those institutions to go back to. We had the institutions of liberal culture, either as a real home for people who taught there or were firmly involved in the art scene, or as a place that you sort of aspire to, visit occasionally, whatever. It seemed like it was there. I think in the future, it's not gonna be. We saw that this year We saw what it looks like when the institutions of liberalism are surrounded by police. And we saw how the police get into the entire discourse of the institution and become the required discourse for those who enter those places. So I think in the future, you will not think, feel, or express in those institutions. You will practice in those institutions increasingly a command form of art. And in fact, that has been going on for a long time already. We had a kind of illusion of the softness of these institutions, a false illusion, which was shown by the truncheons of the police this spring to be entirely false, dangerous, and increasingly threatening. And so what I aspire to leave for a future generation is the desire, the courage, and the discipline to create spaces where you can still intensify your perception, your reflection, and your expression. Because I don't think that's a given. I mean, the fact that we could believe for so long that it was okay to live in an empire is unbearable. It's unbearable. And but where are we going to say that, you know? Where are we going to feel that? Where are we going to do anything to change that? I don't believe it will be in these liberal institutions, because I think they're becoming the pure institutions of the bourgeoisie and therefore of the police. And so without that, and I think it takes desire, but I think it also takes a certain kind of courage to admit that you live in a kind of enemy territory, and obviously it takes the discipline of creating not just a space, but the kind of confidence, the kind of trust to be able to express both one's fear as well as one's resolve, to be able to explore what structures your life on the outside, but also psychically explore what structures your life in that inside of yourself that you don't even know. That experimental space of art, I think now has, I don't know, you know, I think that's what keeps institutions alive, of course, and it's not that I'm against institutions, it's just that the noose has so tightened around the thing that if we don't give a bigger effort to creating those spaces, there'll be no way to re-transform these institutions, to reopen up some space and to actually have some influence over what I call the police, but all the forms of violence, you know. So I think this is a big and important thing, and certainly for the upcoming years, it's urgently important. It's not just an idea.
Amen.
And amen for this conversation. It has been so beautiful and life-affirming. Thank you all for your generosity and sharing your time and knowledge with all of us. Thank you.
All right.